a couple of things to note about Zoom. I'm sure many of you have been on many Zoom meetings before this, but you are able to change your name and title in your in the box there that has your picture if you turn your camera off. If you're So if you go to participants and click on the more button, you're able to put your name and your business or organization if you'd like to have that affiliated and on the screen. So that would be, if you want to do that, that'd be great. Last names would be good, just so that we know who everybody is. Thanks very much. And I love seeing everyone's faces on the camera. That's awesome. If you run into concerns with bandwidth or anything and need to turn off, that is fine. But we like to see all the faces. That's nice. And my name is Robin Arthur. I'm with HNTB, and I'm supporting KDOT on this US 69 project, and very excited to be here with you all. And I'll be kind of guiding the presentation. This meeting is recorded, so those of us that aren't here right now or will be able to view the meeting later on. So just keep that in mind. And then if you're not already muted, feel free to mute yourselves to avoid any background noise. And just a reminder, don't put us on hold if you are talking, because sometimes the music is a distraction. You can use the raise your hand function or type comments into the chat for the moderator to see. And you can take yourself off mute if you want to interject comments or ask questions throughout the presentation, or use the chat feature. And then, as I said, that if bandwidth is a concern, feel free to turn the camera off during the presentation. We'll be using interactive polling during this meeting to kind of keep you engaged and ask some questions throughout the presentation. So what we're going to do is do a little icebreaker right now, and it's the menti.com. And I still have a few people coming in the meeting, so I'm trying to get them in as well. So I'm going to pause here for just a minute, let you guys log in there to the menti.com. You can do that on a browser or on your phone, and you can use the QR code to scan, and then just type that code in to the thing, and it'll bring up any questions that we have. So hi all, there's a few people that joined that I think are just getting in and getting all set up. We have a good group of folks here today. So the first thing we're going to do we're going to test out our Menti poll and do a little bit of an icebreaker. So for those of you that are here, just type in that Menti to the menti.com, and then use the code 865291 and take our little quiz here, our icebreaker poll. All right, is everybody able to do that? We've got about 19 people who've participated so far.
No, I have no idea what Menti thing you're talking about. Sorry.
That's all right, Patrick. Thank you for speaking up. I appreciate that. So if you have a separate browser open or a cell phone nearby, you can type in www.menti.com.
Okay.
And then you'll see an opportunity to put in an access code of 865291.
Okay, thank you.
And then you should get to have the question. So if you all haven't used this before, we'll have some poll questions that'll be throughout the presentation. And the presentation, you can see it through Menti, but we'll be showing it on the screen as well. And then the poll will just pop up throughout the meeting, and we'll be just looking for some feedback throughout the meeting. So it's just—
I'm sorry, Robin, what was that code again, please?
865291. It's at the top of the screen on the little, if everyone's seeing what was the best part of your Thanksgiving, it's at the top. It's 865291.
Thank you.
All right. And this is just a way to get us acclimated to the system here. It looks like yeah, everybody had a good Thanksgiving, enjoyed the family. Not very many people watched football this year, which I guess isn't surprising because there weren't that many games on. I forgot that it was on as well. So anyway, so we'll have the opportunity to use Minty again, but we're going to get started with our presentation. And so before we have the secretary provide her remarks, I'm going to ask Steve Rockers, the US 69 KDOT project manager, to kind of introduce the KDOT project team. And we also have partners from KTA and City of Overland Park here as well today. So I'd like Steve to say hello to everybody so everybody can see his face and know, and just kind of share who the KDOT project team is.
Thank you, Robin. Good morning. As Robin mentioned, I'm Steve Rockers. I'm KDOT's project manager. We are excited to welcome Secretary of Transportation Julie Lorenz on the presentation this morning. We also have joined us from KDOT is Ann Melton, Kelly Kotala, and Mike Reinhardt from District. Will be the main contacts for the project. Thank you. So. That's.
And I think, and we also have KTA. Rachel Bell is with us, and Overland Park we have Lorraine and Sean Riley and Meg Ryan. And so I think at this point, let's turn it over to the secretary to say hello and provide us a welcome.
Well, thank you, Robin, and thank you everyone from the advisory group for joining today. Your service is very much appreciated, and I look forward to sharing a little bit of information about the EIC, the Eisenhower Legacy Transportation Program. Robin, if you want to advance this slide, I think, and also speak a little bit about really why this project is so important, certainly to Overland Park and Johnson County and to Kansas, and I would argue actually it's an important project to the Midwest, and I'll speak a bit more about that in a few minutes. But I wanted to start with saying thank you all for your service and for bringing your thoughts, because it's only by sharing information and understanding your perspectives and representing the larger community that we can arrive at good solutions. So first, let's talk a little bit about the EIC program. I'm very pleased to say that it was passed by the legislature with 4 hours to spare before they went home from an abbreviated session due to COVID. Kansas has a strong, proud tradition of having 10-year transportation programs dating now over 3 decades. And it's really that consistent view of transportation that is so important to a strong system, multimodal system. And certainly I think we could all reflect on years where funding wasn't always as available as we wanted or needed it to be. But having a framework to deliver a program over 10 years is super important. And I couldn't have been happier that it was passed by the legislature, despite some really pretty daunting circumstances. So we put this 10-year program together, signed by Governor Kelly, approved by the legislature, with the input of more than 2,000 Kansans. And it took us about 2 years, starting with the legislative task force, which began really in 2018. We took 2019 to go around the state and gather input, and then it was approved in 2020. I'm also pleased to say that transportation enjoys bipartisan support, and that is super important. It's infrastructure, and everybody needs to drive on roads and get goods and services through our transportation system. So I'm pleased with the bipartisan support that we receive for transportation. Some key elements related to the Eisenhower Legacy Program. For the first time in legislation, it calls for the transportation system to be funded at a level, preservation to be funded first. Obviously, we have to meet our bond requirements, but past that, we will establish a set metric or performance standard and make sure that we are preserving our system at that level. Our transportation system is worth north of $30 billion. It's one of the most valuable assets the state has, and we need to make sure we're taking good care of it. We have gone from selecting major projects every 10 years, which was, if you were one of the lucky communities that were that had your project selected, you knew for sure you were going to get your project delivered. maybe a little later than you'd hoped, but you knew it was going to be in that 10-year program. Now we recognize that things just change too quickly, whether it's technology or community needs, because if you didn't get your project selected, that meant you had to wait 10 years for it to have the opportunity to have that conversation again. We will now be putting projects into a development pipeline, and every 2 years selecting projects for construction and then putting more work in the pipeline. As a result of many things, including not enough funding across the T-Works program, the development pipeline is largely empty at this point. So I announced in May, putting $1.6 billion worth of highway projects into the development pipeline. We're starting work on those in terms of design, but we now have to continue to have conversations with communities about how to fund projects to get them out of the development pipeline and into construction. And that's certainly part of what this conversation on US 69 is about. This program very much emphasizes right-sized practical improvements. So things like out in Western Kansas, of course, people want 4-lane highways everywhere. Bottom line, we can't afford to continue to build 4-lane highways like we used to in the past. What we've learned through study and practical experience is that passing lanes are often a good safety improvement. May not be everything that a community wants, but we are very much looking at passing lanes as an alternative to more expensive 4-lane highways. And I could go on and on about some of the other practical improvements, and Steve Rockers on the phone knows that I talk about this a lot. But getting a little bit of a shoulder on a highway, maybe not the biggest shoulder that folks would want, but we're very focused on right-sized improvements. Without question, we have implemented several new partnership programs, and they're extremely popular. Cost share is a good example. We stood that program up in 92 working days. And those are funds that are available for any mode, both on the state and local system, but we look to locals to help bring some money to the table. Whether you're looking at Turner Diagonal, that we announced the opening of that about maybe 4 to 6 weeks ago, that included federal, local, and state dollars. Cost share projects include local and state funds, but we know we can do much more if we're all working together, both in terms of money, but also making sure that we're all, pulling on the same rope in the same direction at the same tempo. Things go a lot better when you're working in partnership. Local bridge program is another example of where we're working with locals. We have about 30,000 bridges. Of those, 25,000 are local bridges and about 5,000 are state bridges. And we have a big backlog in terms of bridge needs. So in addition to taking care of maybe some of our smallest bridges, we also know that there's a world of opportunity as it relates to technology. So we now have a program called Preservation Plus, so that when we're out doing some preservation work in a really cost-effective way, dig once would be the concept there. When we open a trench, go ahead, allow the private sector to come in and put some fiber in, or if it's more advantageous for us to put the fiber in and lease some of that out, happy to do that as well. I want to be clear, we're not competing with the private sector, but we're trying to be much better partners and find cost-effective ways to expand broadband service, particularly in rural areas. We also have a new technologies program, which we funded about $2 million. We just had an announcement in Lenexa about 2 weeks ago, talking about some of the new technology projects that we're funding. Also, a strong focus on multimodal transportation, whether that's on the surface or rail. We have a new rail shortline program that's just been implemented, along with our ongoing aviation work. Kansas is the air capital of the world, and we need to make sure that we keep a preeminent position in that sector, both that financial sector as well as the transportation sector. So I could go on and on, so I need to be careful. Robin's going to tell me I need to quit talking at some point, but we've done some really fantastic work as it relates to drones. Last November, so a little over a year ago, we conducted the first beyond line of sight flight in America, and we're working with the FAA to figure out how to regulate our airspace as it relates to drones. And I would be remiss if I didn't point out that one clear requirement of the new Ike legislation is to make sure that we deliver all of the delayed T-Works projects. In fact, one phase of each of those delayed projects must be initiated before we can begin construction on any of the new Ike projects. It's important that when we make promises that we deliver those to Kansas residents, and that's what number 8 shows here, it's also a result, I would say, of funding not being fully available to KDOT. So we do have some delayed projects. We're tracking those carefully, and you can see their progress on our website. Robin, I'm going to stop there and see if anyone has any questions about the program before I talk about the principles of the program and give a thank you. But are there any questions related to the program? All right. If not, let's go on to the next slide, Robin. All right. So the principles upon which IKE has been constructed, partnerships, and I talked a little bit about that on the previous slide. Partnerships means working together to better understand your needs, particularly your citizens' needs, because transportation isn't really about roads and bridges, or not just roads and bridges. It's really about moving people where they want to go with as much choice as possible, as cost effectively as possible. And so I talk a lot about transportation is really about people and freight and technology, and working with communities to understand their needs and to deliver solutions. And money's part of that, but it's certainly not the only part. Options, number 2, whether we're talking about, and this is a great project to explore, tolling for one lane. It opens up some new options, some new tools for Overland Park, and it provides a model for other communities, perhaps. It gives you more options for providing your share of the cost share. So it's a good example of looking at options for money. It's also a good way for looking at options to implement some new toll technology. But when we talk about options, we are open to talking about right-sized options, ways to generate money, thinking about working on the local system as well as the state system. So it takes both. It takes partnership and options to get to problem solving, because again, we're here to solve problems for people, for Kansans. Transportation is often a part of the solution. It's not always the full solution. And so those are the 3 things I talk a lot about: partnerships, options, coming together to solve problems for people. All right, so with that, I'd like to go on to the final slide and again say thank you. Thank you for engaging in this conversation about an exploration of looking at managed lanes. And I know Cameron's dialed up later to talk in more specifics, but that's what we're here to do, is to take a look at the upsides and the downsides. The thing that excites me about this project is that it's a first in Kansas. It's a result of legislation that expanded the options for Kansas communities to take a look at managed lanes or a tolled lane to help generate funds as cost share, as part of your match. And I'm really appreciative that we have this opportunity to give you another option to explore. It's really important to me, and I've talked to the project team about this, that this process goes really well. And when I say well, it's not that there's a foregone conclusion. What I mean is that people are engaged, different viewpoints are encouraged, and we fully explore the financial aspects, the environmental pieces, equity kinds of questions, so that we get to a good solution for Overland Park, for people who use 69, whether they're in Overland Park or in other parts of the region, but also realize as really the thought leadership role that your community plays, not just in Kansas, but in the metro area. By taking a serious look at a new option, you're opening the doors potentially for Wichita and other communities to consider this as a tool in the future. So with that, I'll pause and see if you have any questions.
If you do, you need to take yourself off mute. So thank you, Secretary. That was
okay. I'll be here for another half an hour or so, but I'm going to put myself on mute. And thank you all again for your service.
And yes, and I reiterate that. Thank you very much for your participation today and engagement. And we have brought together you all today as a diverse group representing the corridor, the users of the corridor, residents, businesses, regional interests. And some of you have more knowledge about transportation than others, but you all bring great knowledge and insights to the table that can help us as a project team. And so we're looking forward to that ongoing discussion that we'll have throughout the project. And you all have great connections within the community that are going to help us reach out and have a broad group of folks engaging and help us reach out to the broader public to understand how people really feel about this. So that's why you're all here, and we are excited to have you and looking forward to further discussions, and we'll have more opportunity to get to know each other better as we move through the meeting and the meetings that we'll be having. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Cameron to really talk about the project.
Very good. Well, good morning. I assume everybody can hear me. Can I get a thumbs up that we're good to go? All right, very good. So, well, again, good morning. As the secretary and Robin have just taken us through, this is obviously a very important project for both KDOT and Overland Park, and we're very appreciative of all of you being willing to be part of this advisory group. My name's Cameron McGowan. I'm with H&TB Corporation, and I'm our firm's project manager, again, supporting KDOT on this project. Through the next portion of this meeting, maybe the next 30 minutes or so, I want to spend some time discussing the efforts that are just beginning and hopefully answer some of the questions that you see here on this slide. Since this is our first time together, we would anticipate that there's a lot of questions. What is this study? What are the questions that we're trying to answer through the efforts that we'll undertake over the next several months? There's been a lot of look at US 69, but how is this going to be different than all of the previous work that's been done out there before? What's different now? And then obviously, why is there the emphasis on tolling, and why are we looking at it here, and why are we looking at it now? And then I hope to provide some clarity around the decision-making process and just hopefully help everybody understand how we're envisioning this moving forward. So I hope to answer most of these questions over this next segment to the level that we're able to here today. So, but before we take a deeper dive into what we'll be doing over the next several months, I think it is worthwhile to provide some context about how we got to where we are today. As many of you know, US 69 has been a consistent top transportation priority for the city of Overland Park. And because it's been such an important roadway for the city, they have really been in a leading position to be both proactive and I would say creative about getting things done along US 69. And this has really only been accomplished through an exceptionally strong partnership between the city and KDOT. So the path to where we are today actually began in the late 1990s with a county-wide comprehensive high-level look at needs and improvements that was not just on US 69, but looked at really I-35 and I-435 and the entire freeway network in Johnson County. And one of the outcomes of that major investment study, that first bullet that's there in 1999, was that the I-435 and US 69 interchange was one of the most pressing needs in the region. And so a natural outgrowth of that MIS was to begin planning for the next, to begin planning and design on that I-435 and US 69 interchange. And that passed a major milestone in around the 2004 timeframe when that project received environmental approvals. That set in motion for improvements at the, focused at the 435 and US 69 interchange, which are those color-coded projects that you see there on the slide. It set the stage for that to move forward in a series of 7 phased projects, all of which were, given a color to help clarify which improvements we were talking about. Really set the stage for that to move forward. And over the decade from about 2005 to 2015, 4 of those 7 projects have actually been built. In parallel with that, though, the city has led efforts on its own to add an interchange at the 159th Street interchange, as well as begin planning for modifications of the 167th Street interchange. Those are things that were city-led initiatives in the corridor. But in addition to just the progression of working to get these projects built and accomplished, I think that there are a few items that are not necessarily widely known, but I do believe are particularly noteworthy. And that, in my mind, starts with the US 69 Green project. So you can see that stretch that kind of goes from around 435 and 103rd Street on up to the north. That project was moved to construction in 2009. And if you remember back to 2009, that was right after, the beginning of the financial crisis and the Great Recession. And the federal government had just passed the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, or ARRA, which focused on public works projects. That project was funded using ARRA funds primarily because of the city and KDOT's proactive approach of getting that project ready for construction. And it was actually one of the first projects in the US to actually move to construction using ARRA funds, and was significant enough at a national level that at the time, Vice President Joe Biden actually came and helped us break ground on that project. So something I think that the city should be very, very proud of. The next phase, the red project, which you see there on the graphic, that project was the first expansion project let out of the previous 10-year transportation program, the T-Works program. It was put in a position and ready to go before there was even a program in existence. So that obviously took a lot of proactive work and faith on the part of both KDOT and the city that a program would materialize, and it put it in a position to be early in that program. The next thing that I might highlight is the 159th Street interchange that I mentioned before. That project was actually the first transportation public-private partnership in Kansas, with private dollars from that developer contributing to the funding of the construction for that. So again, another example of the creativity and looking for new ways to get things done in this corridor. And then maybe the last point that I would make is, with all of these investments in the corridor, the city of Overland Park has invested over 65 million city dollars to help make these projects happen. So really just another example of that partnership between KDOT and the city has really led to the successful development of getting the 69 corridor in the position that it is today. Maybe the last thing that I would say before we move off of this is that through this 20-year period, these improvements have not been done in a vacuum. There have been dozens of public meetings, community presentations, and other outreach that have really shaped the way that this has progressed. And continuing that engagement is extremely important to us now as we look to kind of take the next steps in the corridor. I want to move to the next slide. So I do want to spend some additional time on two of the most recent studies because those really set the stage, or the jumping off point for where we're wanting to go here with these over the course of the next several months. And the first of those is the US 69 concept study. So again, this was an initiative that the city took in 2016 to undertake a study of US 69. And the reason for this was that up to this point, all of the effort had been focused at that 435 US 69 interchange. And what was happening in the real world was that there were new issues starting to emerge in areas that were not focused on that US 69 and 435 interchange. More specifically, the areas south of Blue Valley Parkway, between there and say 151st Street, we started to see some issues there. So this new study focused on trying to answer the questions that you see here. How have the issues changed? What would those improvements look like? And what was the magnitude of those, in terms of a cost to address all those issues? And then how should those be improved over time or prioritized? So with that study, that really expanded the limits all the way down to 179th Street, where we took that took that more comprehensive look. And essentially what we found is beyond just the issues centered up at 435 and US 69, there is a broader, more corridor-wide capacity issue, but with some distinct bottlenecks between that segment between 135th Street and Blue Valley, and then again up near 119th Street. You move to the next slide. So we also found that safety was a major issue in the corridor, and I think that that is being reflected as we have conversations with those in the community. This consistently comes up as a major concern. So, you know, the crash rates in this segment of US 69 are well above the statewide average for similar facilities. And at the time that we were evaluating this in the 2016-17 timeframe, there was an average of a crash about every 3 days on this corridor. So significant issues from a safety perspective. Again, with respect to just the physical roadway and bridge condition that's out there, everything that's out there is approaching 50 years or has surpassed 50 years. This stretch of US 69 was all constructed in the late 1960s, early 1970s. And while the surface condition is fairly good, it won't last forever just with continual maintenance. So there's a need to start evaluating a long-term solution there. And then the biggest issue by far is congestion. And especially during the peak periods, and given the growth that we continue to see in this region, we project those issues will get significantly worse in the future years. As you look kind of the dials that are on there, if you take a trip that originates at 159th Street and go up to College Boulevard, if you're driving that at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a Sunday, that's about an 8.5 minute trip. At the time we were looking at this, during the peak periods, the morning rush, evening rush, you started to see some delay, and that trip grew to 10 to 14 minutes, depending on which direction you were going. And then as we look in the out years, without improvements, by the time you get to the 2040 period or 2040 years, that really starts to increase and really start to see some substantial delay in the corridor. And we feel like that's something that if it grows to that level, that is the level of delay that does start to impact obviously quality of life, but also economic development in the region. Maybe the last thing to note on there is the magnitude of the cost that it takes to actually address these issues. At $547 million, that is a big price tag to actually address the issues that are projected in the corridor. And so more or less the conclusions of this study were there's significant problems and a significant price tag associated with fully addressing all the problems out to 2040. Might turn it back to Robin here for just a second. We want to ask a couple of questions.
Yeah, at this point, let's just take a quick poll and say, what area of US 69 is of most concern to you? 179th Street to 151st Street, 151st to 135th, 135th to 119th, or 119th to 103rd. And just based on your experience with the corridor, and if you're not all that experienced with the corridor, you know, maybe take a guess from anything you've heard, or but what are you feeling that of concern to you? And so we're seeing some the results pop in, and it looks like 135th to 119th Street is of a concern to many of you, most of you. And Cameron, any thoughts on that? Does that make sense with the information that you all have found?
This seems very in line with both the comments that we get as we ask this question more broadly, but also borne out in the data from years ago and everybody's experiences from I'll say pre-COVID peak hour travel.
All right, well,
we want to move on.
Yeah, that's good feedback. And we'll move on to go into the tolling. So thanks.
Yeah, I had a question for Cameron.
Sure.
Yeah.
This is Carlos with the Hispanic Chamber. I know city intersections have rankings on traffic flow, A through F, A being the best, F being worst. Do
Yep.
highways have those codes? And I'm sure they change during peak times, like you said. And if so, after these improvements, how much does it improve that traffic flow?
Yes. So that concept of level of service is usually graded A through F. Similar, it's a different type of analysis, but similar kind of nomenclature for highways than it is for intersections. Essentially, when both existing peak hour travel times, we were seeing levels of service that were well into the F range even today, and obviously that just gets worse. It gets to be a triple F as the time goes on. As we were evaluating potential improvements, the objective there was we were targeting trying to get to a level of service D or better in the future year peak periods. That was sort of the operational goal. But that operational goal simply is definitely up for some debate, and I think may change a little bit as we look to potential express lanes as a solution here. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Any other questions before we move on here?
This is Tariq Aziz. I have a question. I want to understand if this study on 69, this runs north-south, basically in the region we are studying, and we have a lot of arteries that run north-south, like Schweitzer, like Antioch, like many others. So, and those arteries have not been developed after a certain south sectors. So have we studied that if we divert actually the local traffic on those arteries and develop those arteries and keep the pressure off from the 69 for the through traffic, is that being considered?
Yes, and I would say that is a part of what we will be doing in significantly more detail with this current study. So one thing that is a difference between what we have looked at in the past and what we're doing here is the scope of our traffic model that we'll use to evaluate sort of the regional traffic performance will extend out and include the parallel arterial routes of both Metcalf and Antioch. And you're correct that there are some segments of that are still not, I'll say, fully built out. But when you get north of about 159th Street, those arterials really are fairly built out. And in some ways, I would argue that the local city arterial network has kept pace maybe better than US 69 has in terms of addressing the volumes on those parallel arterial roadways. So there is some room to maybe get some additional capacity out of the local street network. But they have been improved in many areas, but we'll be looking very comprehensively at those arterial networks and how they tie into the overall regional operations. Does that answer your question?
Yep, thank you.
Very good. Any others before I move on? Okay.
This is Fred Spears, and we recently had the National Director or Secretary of Transportation out. He drove 69, and his comment was that traffic on Metcalf and Antioch, which he could see from 69, was moving better than the traffic on 69.
Right.
That's just an editorial comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to maybe switch gears here and talk a little bit more detail to add on to the Secretary's comments about some of the new tolling legislation. So in 2019, there was the passage of the new tolling bill, which is KSA 682120, more commonly referred to as tolling bill. And this legislation grants KDOT the authority to develop new toll projects, but it does come with some restrictions. And I think several of those are important for this group and really broadly for folks to understand because they're pretty significant. So first of all, no existing lane of any state highway can be tolled. So as that looks, as we look to apply that to US 69, the existing 4 lanes that are out there, KDOT cannot convert those into toll freeways. It's only new capacity where you have the ability to toll. So the existing 4 lanes that are there today have to remain toll free and accessible to all users. Second, the tolls have to be charged on all users regardless of class, size, or kind of traffic. So essentially what that's saying is by statute, KDOT cannot allow free trips in the express lanes. The next thing, there has to be at least one public meeting. There has to be input or opportunity for public input. And then the last thing that I think is significant is that all of the revenue must remain in that roadway. So for new tolled roadways, KDOT cannot take the revenue generated by that roadway and say apply those dollars to other needs across the state. For US 69 or any other tolled roadway that is developed under this statute, if there's excess revenue, it has to stay and be applied to that roadway. The bill also outlays the process by which potential toll projects become authorized to move forward. So it must first have community support and at a level that the community and KDOT proposal is presented to the KTA board for their approval. And if it's approved by the KTA board, the proposal is taken to the State Finance Council. And only if it receives approval by both of those bodies does the project advance as a toll project. So I might take a pause there, and if Secretary Lorenz is still on, if she wants to add anything to that.
Thank you, Cameron. I would say this is in my opinion, this legislation is a fantastic example of the process really working. So the initial language of the bill was brought forward, and it was really through a lot of work on both the Senate and the House side, transportation committees, and also through Ways and Means. And I'll just say, like, there are now good checks and balances to make sure that there's community input and that KTA is a part of the discussion, as well as State Finance Council. And certainly being very clear that anything that is free today, although there really isn't anything that's free, it's tax supported, but anything that's free today remains free tomorrow. So if you hear someone talk about, I'm uncomfortable with a new toll road, this isn't a new toll road, this is simply a tolled lane. And it's really very much with the eye toward a way for communities to help generate matching dollars. And one of the things that I think is so interesting, and Cameron, I hope you talk about it a little bit more, managed lanes provide a choice. Remember, we were talking about options for a person who wants a more reliable speed and a more reliable time to choose to get into that lane and to pay a bit more to access that lane. But other folks do not have to make that choice and can stay in the quote unquote free lanes. But the awesome benefit is that the whole thing just works better. So there is absolutely not a preconceived notion yet that this has to be a managed lane, but what it does do is it allows you to get to this project sooner. Cameron's talked about the price tag. And we all know that through COVID, there's been an impact to state revenues. Certainly we know there's been an impact to local revenues as well. So we have to take all of those things into consideration. But what the toll essentially helps you do is get that project. I talked earlier about the development pipeline and into construction. It helps us get 69 out of the development pipeline and into construction faster. Okay, happy to take questions.
And we do have a question from Greg. Greg Musel has his hand up. So thanks for using that feature. So I'll take yourself off mute and please ask your question, Greg.
Thank you. And I think Julie Brewer had a similar question, but I have a little bit of skepticism about a statute that says all revenue must be used on this particular toll project, given how KDOT's revenues raised under previous statutes has been used or abused by the legislature. Is there a process? I mean, if you bond it, then those bond revenues obviously have to, the revenues have to be used for the bond. but is there a protection that says we're not going to raise more tolls on here than we need that could then be diverted by the legislature to some other project? Because I think those of us in Johnson County have been concerned about diversion of transportation funds, as has KDOT. But what are the protections from that?
Yeah, Greg, that's an excellent question. And I would say that all gets worked out in the terms and conditions portion of the study. So I would say what you're doing right now, raising that concern, is exactly the right thing to do so that we can fully address that as we go through the toll feasibility study and understand not just what do the dollars look like, but what are those terms and conditions? I mean, that's the word I would use. There may be a more specific word, but we need to work out those terms and conditions. I would also say, from my perspective, that the interpretation of roadway doesn't mean, so KDOT will assume the maintenance of this facility. The generation of the toll could be used potentially in the future if you wanted to expand the improvements of 69 from the limits today into, maybe you want to improve south of this project limit. You could then use that as like seed money for the next portion of an improvement. It cannot be used, for example, we can't take this toll revenue and move it out to Western Kansas. That is not at all our intention. It's not fair. But you could conceive this money, I think, to be used to help in future improvements as well. Something to think about. We can work that out in terms and conditions.
Okay, it's not your intentions that I doubt at all. So
I appreciate. I hear you. I hear you from the T-Works days.
A corollary question is: does this mean the state does not support that portion of the road that was built or is to be maintained by toll roads, that we're not going to get any other state support for that? No, I look at it. This is the way I would explain it simply is that this is a state highway. We're going to add, we could add, right? We don't know. We could add a lane on either side. That new capacity, you'd be charged to get in that lane. It'd be your choice if you want to get into it or not, but we provide maintenance across all 6 lanes. Okay.
Like we would, whether it had a toll on it or not.
All right, and we had some other questions from in the chat box before we get to Carlos. Julie had a question in the chat box and she's raised her hand as well. So I'm going to let her take herself off mute and ask her question. And then Clint had a question as well that I will read. So Julie, go ahead.
Okay, so Greg kind of asked one side of that question as far as negative repercussions if the limitations on the toll road were of such that it doesn't really benefit us at the level we would want it to benefit. I'm going to be on the positive side from the standpoint of looking at this as a opportunity to continue building coalition. If there are other portions of 69 that are within the county that these funds could help improvements and maintain in addition to state funds that are expended on those roads. I'm looking at that as a way to maybe be a positive for those who may be dragging their feet on support by being thoughtful about having more readily accessible, robust funding that maintains the whole stretch of 69 that is most contiguous to the areas that maybe our constituents are going to be concerned about at a level that to everyone's satisfaction. Am I misinterpreting?
So if I understand,
you could write the terms. Go ahead.
So let me say what I think, if I understand the question, and then I think there's a clarification in there. So the funds are so the tolls that are generated are to help offset the cost of the improvement. Okay. So I think we would have to have a conversation again around those terms and conditions about whether those funds could be used to help a new improvement. I don't think we want to get in the business of thinking that tolls are going to be used for maintenance.
Okay.
Or preservation, because I would just say, like, we have a responsibility, and when I say we, I mean everybody has a responsibility. This is one of our most valuable assets in the state, and we ought to be taking care of it. And we ought to have the funds available to provide a decent maintenance effort. So I am really hesitant. Tolls are a good opportunity, I think, to fund something new, but we ought to, in regular budgets, be able to afford our maintenance. So does that make sense, Julie? If that's your question, I'm very hesitant to ever say that we're going to use tolls for maintenance, because that's just, that was not what was envisioned under this legislation.
Right. I guess my only follow-up question to that is if folks are thinking of potential negative consequences of increased lanes on that section, which may be more wear and tear overall, because, you know, Metcalf and Antioch and Schweitzer and Quivira have been used as secondary arteries when you feel like 69 is just going to be during those peak use times. So you may see more traffic because of that. And one of the things that I think some stretches of highway struggle with, quite frankly, is the increase of litter that's generated sometimes on higher use, and where that falls as far as, is that considered an ongoing maintenance responsibility, or is that considered a jurisdiction's responsibility on where that stretch of litter may be occurring?
Okay, so it is it's generally considered a maintenance effort, and it is a reflection, Julie, I appreciate the question. It's a reflection of the fact that, you know, over that 10-year period, and I think Greg was kind of alluding to some of this, when a lot of funds were removed from KDOT, we lost 600 across that time frame. And a lot of those folks came from the field, which did that kind of maintenance work and the litter collection. We actually, in fact, first time ever last year, actually executed a contract with a contractor, a private firm, to help with some maintenance activities in Kansas City, because we don't have the staff to do it. So I appreciate the comment, but I think we want to try to keep those toll dollars focused on improvements and not maintenance, and you should hold us accountable. And we need to have the funding available to be able to execute maintenance at the level that citizens expect.
Okay, we've got a couple more questions in the chat, and then a couple other people that have their hands raised, and I'm trying to kind of keep everybody in order here. So the next question was from Clint, and it was, is the goal of the toll to reimburse the state for the $547 million?
Not the full amount, no. It's for Overland Park's sort of cost share portion.
Very good. And then Carlos, we'll go to you for your question.
Yeah, will this development have DBE or minority women goals on it? And if so, do we know what those percentages are? And would that be in the bill?
That is a good question, Carlos. And I would just say it's early. I believe that we meet our DBE kinds of requirements through our construction projects, but I should trying to answer a question that I don't know the precise answer to, but I'm happy, Robin, if you'll take a note, happy to get contracts involved to answer those specific questions.
Thank you.
I appreciate the question very much.
All right, and then before we go back to our next hand raiser, where Josh Powers had a question about transit. Josh, do you want to take yourself off mute and ask the question you have?
Thanks, Robin, and thank you, Secretary Lorenz, for taking the time to talk today. It's good to see you. Maybe a question for Cam, if he's intimately familiar with the statute, or the Secretary as well. But, and forgive me if I'm ignorant on this, but does the toll then also apply to public transportation? And if it does, is that a missed opportunity to address congestion?
Hey, Josh, so here's what I would tell you is, like, this is one of the benefits of being the first in the state, is that this legislation, I would say, doesn't really speak to transit. So this is an opportunity through negotiating those terms and contract and conditions. We want to be good partners. KDOT wants to be working in concert with Overland Park and with Johnson County and the Metro. So this is an opportunity to figure out, kind of like Julie's earlier question about, could these dollars be used for maintenance, which I would argue we ought to be doing that. This might be an opportunity to have a transit conversation. So I would not I wouldn't preclude anything right now at all. I think those are good questions. That's what I want this group to do, is raise good questions. You are at the forefront of this. You should raise all the good questions, hard questions, so that we hammer out an agreement that works for 69, that works for travelers and for Overland Park.
We absolutely believe KDOT is a spectacular partner, and the comment had really come from the city of Overland Park, and we want to be good partners with them in developing an approach to this. So we will work with you on that as much as we possibly can. Thanks very much.
All right, then Tariq has his hand raised, so I'd like to go to him to ask his question.
Yes, I just want to understand, because tolling was not here in Kansas, and I think this was one of the very good feature that we have in this state, that we can drive from place to place without real tolling. You go to Chicago, you go to New York, and you are really bombarded by this tolling, and it is really bothersome, basically, when you travel in those places. This putting a toll, have we studied as to what negative effects has the tolling been in those places? And would this be basically a seed to put other highways and motorways on tolling? So would this become a norm in the state of Kansas?
Okay, good question. So a couple of things. One, remember, and I appreciate, I've driven into the Chicago area and others, but remember, the lanes that are free now remain free. So you choose if you want to drive for free. And again, I want to point out, when I say free, those are paid for by the gas tax that you pay and by some sales tax that you pay. So they're free, like, right? They feel free because you just drive on them. That continues. Like 69, what you have today stays like that. It's just this new lane is where you would choose if you want to pay a little more to get in the toll lane. So no, so that's the answer to your first question is stays free. Just the extra lane, the new lane to relieve congestion is tolled. This is not going to work everywhere at all. You have to have enough traffic to generate enough money to even make it worth collecting the toll. And it was really interesting. I had we've had literally legislators reach out and ask if we would toll a bridge that has something like 30 vehicles a day. And the answer to that is no, absolutely. I'm not even going to talk about that, sir. So I'm not at all worried that this becomes something that just develops all over Kansas, because we don't have enough traffic for that. There are only a handful of places where this opportunity works, and we've got rural areas that are asking for feasibility studies, and we just say, no, it doesn't make any sense. We've had a small feasibility study started in Wichita. I'm not sure that's going to pan out because it's on the west, it's in a relatively undeveloped part of the city, and I'm just not sure the numbers are going to work out there to even go beyond cursory review. So does that answer? Oh, and are we going to look at the negative impacts? Absolutely. That will be part of the toll feasibility study. There will be some case studies that are included, and we will take a look at the pros and cons, and I would expect you all to have some conversations about the pros and cons.
All right, we've got 2 more questions I want to address real quick, and then the additional questions that have come in, we'll probably address those during the open discussion time at the end of the meeting, but we do want to get through the whole presentation. So the other 2 questions was from, from Brent Roberts. Does this divert Johnson County's fair share of highway funds to other parts of the state?
No, this is just a way to accelerate your project.
Very good. And then from Tom Herzog, would this fund solutions to address noise pollution as we increase traffic?
I assume that will be part of the environmental. We have NEPA going on in conjunction with the feasibilities, the toll feasibility study, right? So that'll, that's certainly one of the impacts that needs to be evaluated.
Great. And so we'll move on for the rest of the presentation, but a couple of other folks have asked additional questions, Adam and Vanessa, and we will get to those during the chat. So during the next portion. So
I want to say thanks everybody for your participation in the study. Keep asking hard questions because that's how we get to better answers and better solutions. Thank you all.
Thanks so much, Julie.
Thank you.
Well, thanks. Those are great questions, everybody. I'm going to turn it back over to Cameron. So
Yes, fantastic. And I very, very much appreciate everybody's diving in and asking questions. As the secretary said, that's exactly what we want out of this group. And really, that's the way that we'll end up shaping this in the direction that the community wants to go. So you want to change slides here, Kelsey, or there we go. So, all right. So we left off with talking through the new toll legislation passed in 2019. And as we've talked about here, that really opened up a new tool to be applied here. And the question that the city began to ask is, what does that look like for US 69? Is that a tool that might make sense? Here. So in the fall of last year, we conducted what we referred to as a pre-planning analysis that was really focused on trying to answer two questions. You know, what would that even look like on US 69? Could an express lane type solution be incorporated into the concepts that have been previously developed? And then does it have any potential to generate revenue? Because if it does not have any revenue potential, then it largely, you could struggle making it make sense if there is no revenue potential. So we did a very high level analysis that really, like I said, leveraged the work from the previous study, worked with the city and with KTA was also involved in KDOT to develop the express toll lanes concept that you see there on this screen over on the right. That just schematically shows what that might look like. So with this, as we've talked about before, the inside lane or lanes would be tolled, while the existing outside two lanes in this case would have to remain toll free. With this analysis, we looked at some potential access points because typically there are distinct locations where people can exchange between the general purpose lanes and the express lanes. You can't just cross the line anywhere, or else it really diminishes the performance of both the express lanes and the general purpose lanes. So we looked at those access points. We developed some estimates of how many, if it is tolled, how many vehicles do we actually think are going to pay to use the express lanes? Again, looking at that at a very high level. And then we looked at, there is some additional cost for the toll infrastructure that has to be installed to collect the tolls. And at the end of the day, does the project have the potential to generate some excess revenue? So that analysis concluded that there is a viable way to do this on US 69 and incorporating that into the previously developed concepts, and there is some potential to generate revenue. The extent of which, or the magnitude of that revenue, is something that we really need to take a deeper dive into, but it did show that it had some revenue potential. That analysis was presented to the City Council in March of this year, and by unanimous vote, they requested a more detailed study be conducted to kind of dive into the details of how it could work and a better understanding of the revenue potential. And that detailed study is what we're really just starting to get underway here. Kelsey, if you want to flip to the next slide. I think to maybe help everybody visualize the concepts that were envisioned coming out of that pre-planning analysis, we've got a short video that's borrowed from Colorado DOT. So not here, obviously, but it has a lot of similarities to, I think, what we're envisioning here on US 69, or potential. You want to play the video?
One of the most effective techniques for reducing traffic delays and getting you where you need to be when you need to be there is something called express lanes. An express lane can be what you want it to be. It's a lane that expands the capacity of the highway and manages the congestion of the lane through tolling. Express lanes are built in addition to the existing general purpose lanes, providing drivers the choice of using the new lane. Here in Colorado, express lanes are typically on the far left inside lanes and either separated by a concrete barrier or a solid white stripe. The lanes can be entered at the designated areas, shown either with a break in the barrier or with dotted lines. Overhead signs will tell you exactly how much your trip will cost. Toll prices can change depending on congestion. For example, increase toll prices during peak morning or evening traffic to ensure the lane remains a free-flowing alternative for travelers at all times. There are many ways to use express lanes depending on your commuting habits.
Very good. So I want to maybe take a pause there, having now introduced a little bit about what was looked at with that pre-planning analysis and this example from Colorado that we think has a lot of similarities. I want to open it up for another polling question, but I do want to, before we dive into that polling
One
question,
of the most effective techniques for reducing traffic delays and getting you where you need to be when you need to be.
Sorry about that.
All right. Before we dive into that, I do want to say that, this is our first advisory group meeting, and over the course of the next several months here, as we meet more, we really do intend at our next advisory group meeting to take a much deeper dive into those concepts and how they work and what they, how they could potentially operate, and get your feedback on that. That's really what we want to spend a lot of time on, I think, in our next meeting. So there'll be lots of opportunity to dive into that and scrutinize kind of what's been envisioned there thus far. Robin, you want to? So
at this point, we've given you some information about express toll lanes, but we want to understand what your questions are. So feel free to type them in here, and they'll just kind of pop up. And we may not address them all right now, but we might save some of them for the open discussion at the end. But this way, we'll understand what the concerns are that we're going to be addressing in the future, and what the costs look like, and will we need a K tag? These are all great questions. Mm-hmm. We don't, and a lot of that information we'll be finding out, as Cameron said, in the toll study that's being conducted.
Yeah, these are all fantastic questions.
So we might come back to these to just keep us on track with the time, but keep typing them in. We're to keep us on track with time. We're gonna keep moving, but we appreciate. But these will be good to address, and that at the end of the meeting. So.
Yes, fantastic. We'll keep track of those.
So you guys can keep entering those in for sure.
All right, Kelsey, you want to go back to the, okay, so what will we be doing moving forward here? So that very high level pre-planning analysis left a lot of questions that we were not able to answer there. We did not during that analysis, take a deep dive into concepts, and the depth of what we looked at was essentially done just to a level enough to where we had enough confidence that we thought that it was worthwhile to take on a more detailed study. So that's really what we'll be doing here over the next coming months. So the things that we'll be doing, we'll be scrutinizing the concepts that were originally developed, and I think really wanting to take this group's input on, what those concepts look like, access questions, those sorts of things that we really want input from this group in terms of shaping what that ultimately looks like. We'll take a much deeper dive with considerably more robust data on the traffic and forecasting how much traffic we really anticipate to use the express lanes. And that'll really include two things. It'll include a more robust analysis of the traffic operations and safety, specifically those exchange zones where we have traffic moving between the express lanes and the toll-free lanes. We want to make sure that that is developed in a way that operates safely. And then the other thing that we'll be doing is conducting what are called stated preference surveys. So stated preference surveys are a sampling of likely users in the corridor and really asking them, what would you be willing to pay to save a certain amount of time? Previously, those estimates were done with just using some, I'll say, industry rules of thumb. But those stated preference surveys will allow us to get a lot better understanding of what the revenue potential is and what people are actually willing to pay to save time by using those. So in parallel with the technical analysis, there'll also be obviously a robust community engagement, of which this group is a central component of that. We really do view that as a two-way street where input from the group can inform the technical analysis. And beyond the advisory group, there'll be a number of public meetings, presentations to groups, electronic media outreach. So we definitely take that component of it very seriously. Assuming that the technical analysis is favorable and there is support from the community, we'll then develop those proposals and take it through the approval process that I discussed before, both with the KTA board and then the State Finance Council. If the approvals are favorable, then the project would transition from the development pipeline, where design and planning and things like that are occurring, and into the construction pipeline and to start preparing for construction. You want to slip to the next slide? So in terms of what this looks like over time, I know that I feel like I saw a couple of questions come across about timing for all this. So on this slide is just a basic schedule with some of the milestones indicated with those yellow stars. So really where we're at today is the first star on the schedule. We're just getting going with this and really beginning the process of engaging you all. Over the next several months, we'll be focused on the tolling study as we take a deeper dive into all the things that I was just describing. And assuming that there is support to do so, we would target going through that formal approval process with KTA and State Finance Council in around June of next year. And then if it does move forward or is approved to move forward as a tolled project, we'd begin a competitive procurement to select a team to design and build the project to put us in a position to break ground as early as the summer of 2022. So one thing that is an extremely important component and a requirement from a federal perspective to be able to use federal funds on the project is the environmental study or the NEPA process. And I want to turn it over to Gretchen for a couple of minutes to dive into that.
All right, thank you, Cameron. I'm Gretchen Ivey, and I'll be leading the environmental tasks related to the project. And, you know, kind of as I watched some of the questions come through the chat earlier, a lot of them deal with the environmental clearance process that we'll be going through. You know, I know there were some questions asked about noise or questions asked about environmental justice or economic disparity and low-income populations. We'll be evaluating all of that as we look at the environmental impacts to the natural and the man-made environment as a part of the environmental assessment process that we'll be doing. And so this graphic is really just demonstrating what that process looks like as we kind of take us through that. It'll be done in parallel with the toll feasibility process that Cameron was just referring to. And so we're at the stage now that here in a minute, we're going to share kind of the draft thoughts that we have on the purpose and need for the project. And so we've talked about some of that from the concept study or the pre-planning study that's already been done. And we're going to relook at that kind of purpose and need that was done within there and get your thoughts here in a minute on kind of the purpose, needs, and project goals of this project as we move it forward. And so that's really where we are in the process today. But we'll kind of be following this roadmap around to look at the different alternatives we'll consider, including that express lanes concept we just saw the video on a minute ago. We'll be really looking at the impacts and evaluating those impacts in that next step, and then really picking what we call the proposed action or the preferred alternative for the project. And that's the alternative that will really take through this NEPA process and really look at those impacts specifically to make sure we're doing the environmental clearance of that proposed action. It'll go through that formal review process. This is a federal process, and so we'll be working very closely with the Federal Highway Administration on this, as well as a lot of different resource agencies. In fact, later today, we actually have our first kickoff with the resource agencies for them to learn more about this project, kind of similar to what you're doing here. And then it all kind of culminates in putting together that environmental assessment document, taking that through some public meetings, you know, with advisory group here today and other public that are interested in the project to figure out kind of the decision for the project. The decision could be a finding of no significant impact from an environmental standpoint, or through that coordination, we might find there's more significant impacts or public controversy related to the project. It could elevate it to an environmental impact statement. But I think as we've been coordinating with federal highways and the agencies today, we think that the decision will be that finding of no significant impact. That's the goal as we kind of go into the environmental process. So Cameron, if you want to go forward, I'll go ahead and talk a little bit about the purpose and need. So this is some general thoughts that we put together on purpose and need. And you know, the secretary, when she spoke, she covered a lot of the key thoughts on why 69 is so important, you know, looking at things that do modernization and expansion of the 69 corridor, really focused in on that piece from 103rd to 179th Street. But we kind of looked at it and said, you know, as we said through our previous studies, it's insufficient today to meet both current and the future mobility needs of travelers on this corridor. So we're seeing worsening safety. We're seeing worsening reliability and more congestion. And so as we looked at the purpose and need for this project, we really wanted to make sure we were looking at it through the lens of both immediate short-term needs and just long-term sustainable needs so that it operates or future-proofs for the long term. And so as you kind of look at the purpose and need elements that our study team has really been focused on so far, you know, we looked at improving safety. You know, and everything that KDOT and its partners do, you know, safety is a high priority. And so really thinking about the crash frequency and severity on the corridor. We said reducing congestion was critical. So that's that getting into that level of service, you know, A through F grade we were talking about earlier. You know, how do we look at that for both an existing situation and the future traffic demand, and really focus on improving that congestion along the corridor. And then we had that promote sustainability, which is really something for this project we thought was very important, because even adding a lane here, how long can we be sure that that lane is going to operate well? And so when we add this lane in the future, we know that we're constrained from the standpoint of right-of-way and just, you know, budgets and things. How do we look at making sure whatever we add to this corridor will be sustainable for the long term, continue to operate for the long term, and also from the standpoint of, you know, improving the infrastructure condition, so your roadways, your bridges, your shoulders, all of that along the corridor, as well as the ongoing operation and maintenance needs. I know with the secretary, we're talking a little bit about we don't necessarily look at toll projects just to meet maintenance needs, but the one benefit something like this could do is, you know, if it's found to be feasible, it offers funding not just to build the existing capacity that we'd be putting in place, but it would allow some money to go towards ongoing operation and maintenance to make sure those lanes operate well, are maintained well in the future. And then the next one, as you look kind of down here, we said provide flexible choices. And this gets a little bit into Josh's question on transit and all modes and how do we accommodate that with the project. And we said, so we wanted flexible choices to accommodate the needs of all users and all modes on this corridor. That may look different depending on the different types of alternatives we're looking at, but we felt that that was an important aspect of the project as we thought about it. And then also supporting local and regional growth. We know this area of Overland Park and the Kansas City metropolitan region has a lot of growth potential, a lot of ongoing planned and proposed community land use and development. And so we want to make sure that our project is supporting that local and regional growth. And so I'll pause there. You know, we wanted to get the advisory group's thoughts on this and make sure as we look at that purpose and need and we take it forward to the public that we're thinking about all the needs elements you think are most important for this project. And so wanted to get your input. So Robin, I think we have a Minty question on this, if you want to.
Yeah, I think so. You know, would you add any additional items to the purpose and need? And if yes, tell us what you think we need to add or what you think we missed.
Mm-hmm.
While we answer this question, this is Julie with UCS. Do you mind putting that slide back up that highlighted what they were just?
Yeah, you guys can still answer the question. Can't that work? Can work, right, Kelsey? You can show the slide.
And I can really quickly to repeat them. You know, we had as our key elements, we had improved safety, reduce congestion, promote sustainability, provide flexible choices, and support local and regional growth.
I think it flips it off screen if I go back.
That's okay. And so within the promote sustainability, you know, one we talked about a lot was also making sure we had reliability. And so we kind of looked at sustainability and reliability going a bit together for this corridor. So that was one piece that we thought was kind of important, but it's a little bit embedded in that promote sustainability bullet, as you see that. I do see somebody has said yes. Is there any thoughts from the person that said yes, just on what you think we need to incorporate?
And you're welcome to take yourself off mute and just talk about it if you'd like, if that's easier.
This is Fred Spears. I said yes, and I just want to make sure there's enough emphasis on economic development and growth on this. It's kind of just an added addition to it. So that was my only thought and comment. Thank you.
Just making sure when we look at that local and regional growth bullet, we're really thinking about that economic development component.
Right, because that would lead a lot of the residential development. So just wanted to make sure that was emphasized enough. Thank you.
Okay.
And is there another person who wanted to comment?
This is Greg Musil. I like the notion on sustainability and try to type out a comment, but I think it's important in this process to let the public know if we add a lane in each direction for different stages, how far south we go, how long do we predict this will be sufficient, or given development patterns to the south? I mean, this is going to be it for a long time. I think the public always wants to know this is going to cost how much, and it's only going to be good for 5 years. I think to promote this project appropriately, we're going to have to, let the public know how long this is really going to be good for.
Yeah, so Greg, I think that is a good comment. And one of the things that we intend to do is to develop some, I'll say, interim year capacity type analysis that looks at it in, say, a 5-year slices that says, these segments will start to break down by 2035 without additional improvements, or 2040 or whatever the year is, to try and help get to that, answer. I think that the other component of that is express lanes do provide an opportunity to have longer term reliability in that tolled express lane, as opposed to if it was just if the capacity was just added as additional general purpose lanes, because eventually the additional general purpose lanes do tend to fill up. And the managed nature of that express lane gives you an opportunity to manage the performance and provide that reliable trip for longer.
All right, very good.
All right. All right.
This is Julie with UCS. I guess one question that keeps on popping up in my mind as you're kind of this development is on that sweet spot of 69 that I'm on every day. And when we were having in-person meetings, quite a bit of travel to downtown KCMO. And so I still wonder, as I think about stop and go traffic, the corridor you're addressing certainly is a slowdown area. But then when 69 empties onto 35, that's another bottleneck. So improving upstream, what is the impact downstream? And I know there's been there's construction going right now on the 75th Street corridor, but I don't know if that's really going to address that kind of funnel system that happens, I want to say, around Johnson Drive.
Yeah, I'll take that question, Julie. So you're correct that that project there at 75th Street will provide some relief from the bottleneck that's formed there when 69 merges with 35. It's not going to solve the broader capacity issue all the way up and down I-35. One thing that I would say is that there are a significant number of trips on US 69 that are of the nature that they originate in Johnson County or southern Johnson County and go to downtown. I'm not suggesting that there aren't a lot of those, but there are also a lot of trips that are wholly contained within the corridor, that are people that are getting on at 179th Street, or they're entering in Lewisburg, and their destination is actually within the boundaries of this corridor. Part of the issue that you're referring to, though, is we just simply have to start somewhere, and we're trying to address. I think US 69 is a good candidate to begin that, but if this proves to be a successful strategy, your mind certainly can go towards a similar type of solution on other road, congested roadways in Johnson County, and I-35 would be right there at the top of the list.
Thank you.
Anything else before we keep moving here? This is all really, really good discussion. Might have to schedule the next one for like 3 hours.
No one else is laughing. They're all
I
on mute,
know.
I guess. So in terms of the engagement, we have a pretty robust engagement program with this project that includes beyond the advisory group. You'll see those designated at the bottom of the meeting. And for the next 10 months, we'll be meeting with you, fairly regularly, like every month, every other month, to tackle some issues with the project and go through different things about the express toll lanes and get your feedback on information that we'll be presenting to the public. At the top, Gretchen talked about some of the coordination efforts that we'll be doing through our environmental process, which is part of the NEPA process, which is the federal engagement process for the environmental work. And those are also opportunities for public meetings. So we have 3 public meetings planned for this project to make sure that we have that broad outreach. And then we'll be doing additional outreach through websites and other means to gather additional feedback from the public. This also identifies points where we'll be doing city council presentations to the city of Overland Park, where we'll be looking for presentations to the KTA board and action and the state finance council, as Cameron mentioned, to get decisions. And so there is a broad range of public input that we will be gathering through the process in order to make sure that we have all voices heard. And a couple of things that we've done initially as part of this project so we did some community interviews early and a public survey. And so and Suze Parker and Chris Tatham are going to provide some information on that. But we'll go back to that last slide. I'll just cover that real quick. Our engagement process goals are to provide meaningful participation opportunities that are convenient to people and they feel that they can participate, and that we understand what the residents, how they use US 69 and why, so that it can help us assess perceptions on safety, traffic, and conditions, and that their input, we can use that in the technical process to really help us come up with the best solution. And then we'll be reporting on the progress and decisions made and show how this input is used to shape the process. So those are our overall engagement goals. And then I'm going to turn it over to Suze to kind of talk about what we learned from our interviews with our elected and civic officials.
Thanks, Robin. Good morning. I'm Suze Parker with Parker Communications Group, and I'm working with HNTB on community engagement for this project. One of the first things that we did was conduct interviews with about 35 elected officials and civic leaders. What we wanted to find out was what they knew about this project already and what their perceptions were initially of express toll lanes and how they wanted to be engaged in this project as it goes forward. That the responses that we got from those interviews helped us to identify some of those who are on this committee and the information that we're providing to you today, as well as information we'll give you going forward. We also want to be sure that we are providing you with information that helps you answer questions with those that you interact with in the community. And on an ongoing basis, that the information from those interviews helped us to shape the kinds of outreach that we're going to be doing and the project content that we're going to be sharing with the community in the months ahead. So Kelsey, you can jump to the next slide. I just want to share a few of the key takeaways from those interviews. There was wide agreement among those we talked to that expansion is needed and it's needed quickly. We asked what drives that need, and the number one response was quality of life issues, which, as we know, is major in Johnson County. Safety was a close second in the answers that we got. COVID has not diminished the need for expansion. That was, it was the general thought among those we talked to that while there's a decrease in traffic right now with so many people working from home, that's going to change quickly once there's a vaccine, once we're back to normal life. That that congestion on 69 highway is going to come back very quickly. Express toll lanes are generally supported among those we talked to. There were many that said, I want more information, I want to learn more, but there's definitely good support at this point for the concept of toll lanes. And then we were admonished to communicate early and often and everywhere. So as Robin mentioned, we're going to have a very robust community engagement outreach plan. We'll include traditional print, social media, community meetings. We really have taken to heart what we were told in those interviews about communicating broadly as we plan engagement in the months ahead.
Thanks, Suze. I think now Chris Tatham with ETC will talk about the public survey that we just recently completed.
Great. I'll try to be brief and just hit the highlights. For those of you who aren't familiar with the ETC Institute, we've actually surveyed over 100,000 residents of Johnson County over the last decade. So we have tremendous resources to do a survey like this. So it was conducted rather quickly, but we got a great response. We had over 1,200 people complete the survey, including 100 from each of the wards in Overland Park, 300 from folks in eastern Johnson County, and then another 118 in Miami County. So we looked at the distribution with regard to age and other demographic factors. It's very close to the census estimates. And we also have good mapping. We actually captured the address of the respondent, so we can create maps based on where people live. So I'm not going to go into that detail today, but just want to give you a few highlights on the next slide from some of the things that we found. The first thing is we really heard earlier, what types of trips are people taking? We actually asked that in the survey. So we got people who are mainly going between their home and destinations south of 103rd Street. And you can see those who are kind of hanging out between 103rd and 179th and then moving on north or equally distributed. So we can kind of tie where people live and where their travel patterns are. And so for today's presentation, I'm not going to go into the depth analysis that we're going to be doing here, but you can see that all types of trips are very well represented. The next chart, just some of the highlights that we found. 62% of folks surveyed are concerned about public safety. Sometimes you hear, you know, is it 30% or 50% or 2 out of 3? And it's hard sometimes to judge that without a survey, but definitely a high percentage are concerned. Also about the travel time predictability. It's an even greater concern for people who work. And we captured information about people's purpose of trips and so forth. In addition, 41% had concerns about interchanges. 135th Street, so our little poll we did earlier about parts that people were concerned about, was by far the most frequently mentioned. It was mentioned nearly twice as much as any other interchange in the corridor. And then frankly, 26% thought the roadway condition needed to improve, which wasn't that bad, but clearly the concerns are more related to safety, interchanges, and travel flow. If you go to the next chart, this just is concerns that we saw about specific, I guess, concerns about traffic congestion. It's not a real surprise, but again, what the reason for doing a survey like this is to kind of put the true magnitude. How many people are really concerned or really dissatisfied and being affected by southbound traffic flow in the evening? You can see nearly 6 out of 10 people were dissatisfied currently, and northbound in the morning between 6 and 9 a.m. And it depends on where you live in the corridor as to how dissatisfied. As you go further south in the morning, people are greater levels of dissatisfaction, and vice versa going southbound in the afternoon. The next chart just shows some of the things that we found related to concerns with congestion relative to other highways. And Johnson County residents tend to be driving in more urban areas, but about half the folks in all three groups thought that the traffic flow on US 69 was worse than it is on other highways in the region, and also through the state. In the next chart, just highlight some of the things that we found with regard to concerns about specific issues. One of the things we ask people about is how important it is to address different issues in the way improvements are planned. And you can see enhancing driver safety, improving traffic flow, preserving the environment, and promoting economic development were kind of in the top 4. But when we ask people to pick which singular issue is most important, that's what we see on the next slide. and you'll notice that traffic flow is head and shoulders above everything else. So that's really the big thing that people care the most about. Driver safety is a distant second, and you can see everything else. While there may be benefits, the average resident isn't connecting as much with those other issues as they are traffic flow and driver safety. Last thing I'm going to share with you today is just the overall importance that residents think it is to make improvements in this section of US 69. You can see about 9 out of 10 residents think it's important. You'll notice that nearly a third think it's very important and another third think it's important. So most residents think it is time to do something. They'd like to see something done, and clearly traffic flow related issues are the driving factor. We're going to be doing some focus groups with respondents over the next couple weeks to drill down in some of these perceptions in the future. But for today, and given our time, I think I'll stop here and let our next presenter take it from here.
And I'll say, Greg, you had a question. So why don't you ask your question first?
Well, I'm sure that Suze and Chris have talked about this, but the public communication part these days is so hard because social media takes over and dominates. And I just want to make sure that we're monitoring that, because loud voices can take over anything you do, particularly in a project like this. And I'm not surprised 9 out of 10 people want it improved. And Chris, I assume in your focus groups, you'll say, and how much would you be willing to pay for that?
Yeah, we'll be looking at that. The next, actually, I kept off a couple of the slides that have to do with information. So Greg, they'll be on, I think, in just a few more slides. I think we're going to actually talk about that next.
I just think we need to be aware of the social media aspect that will take over some of our controlled public input. Public input's important, but it needs to come from everybody with an equal voice, not just the loud voices on social media.
Yeah, you're right, Greg. That's a great point. And we are going to be monitoring social media. That's a part of our plan, so that we'll know if misinformation is being communicated so that we can respond to that.
Okay, we just had one poll question here. What's your top priority for improvement? And we gave you 4 choices: improve traffic flow, enhance driver safety, boost economic growth, or improve travel time reliability.
Must be Fred Spears' dot on the boost economic growth.
And we may have left some top. If you have a different top priority, we may have left it off. We'll discuss that. How about in the open discussion time frame? If anyone feels like we left out the preserve environment or anything. And these are good responses. Improve traffic flow. That you're consistent with what Chris just shared with us about the general, the message from the general public, and what we also heard from the interviews. So. All right, it looks like results are slowing down, so we'll just move on to the next one. And I just wanted to, Greg had a great comment there about social media. I just wanted to kind of cover some more of our engagement plans. We'll meeting with an advisory group. We'll be doing briefings with the stakeholders and community presentations. We'll be out, talking to the chambers of commerce and any kind of groups, any of your groups that you want us to come talk to. We will be happy to come and meet with them and do a presentation and hear about concerns. We have public information meetings, focus groups, and surveys. We'll be using some online survey tools to at various points as well. We'll have a project website where we can drive traffic to for people to get information. We'll be preparing social media posts and helping monitor that very closely to make sure that we are managing that messaging using tools like Nextdoor and Facebook and Instagram to get information out, and as well as our media. And then we might be placing some paid advertising using geofencing to really target our messaging, and we'll develop some visual simulations to show what it'll look like when it's built, similar to what Colorado did, just so that people will understand what it's going to look like. And then electronic newsletters that we'll be doing on a monthly basis to keep people up to date, and people can sign up for those and you can share that information. We'll also be working closely with Overland Park and Johnson County to get information out. So I think we can go to the next slide. So based on Chris's survey here, it sounds like people really trust the city of Overland Park and Johnson County as their preferred information sources. So we're going to be working with Sean Riley and his team to make sure that we're sharing information and getting good information out to folks, and working with Johnson County to do that as well. And the KDOT project website that we'll be using that, and mailings and different things. So that's one source that we'll be using. And then KDOT's project, the next slide talks about, what's the trusted source of information, and KDOT's project website and the City of Overland Park's website are big trusted sources of information. So we'll be making sure that we're putting information there so people can gather that information and share that out with folks. So at this point, I'd like to stop talking and allow you all to ask additional questions, and then go back to some of the questions that that you had previously that we can address. So Cameron, you want to start that, kick that off?
Yeah, I thought that we might go back to the chat, and there were some questions that we weren't able to get to before the secretary left. And I think maybe the one of the questions that we weren't able to get to was from Adam Hamilton on some of his questions there.
Yes, Adam asked, is there a ballpark idea on how much the tolls will travel from 95th to 179th one way? How much is anticipated to be generated per year? Will this be a permanent toll, or will we anticipate the toll eventually end when the city's share has been paid, or with the new lane becoming a free HOV lane? So there's a couple questions in there.
Yeah, lots of good questions, and I'll do my best to answer the ones that I can. So, and the answers are going to be based on that pre-planning analysis that we had done about a year ago. So when we had looked at that, in terms of approximate values on toll rates, we were looking at something that was in the 30 to 40 cents per mile. So if you look at that over the course of that trip, you're talking about a trip that's $2 to $3 or something like that during a peak period for a one-way trip. Now, all that being said, we were basing a lot of that pricing on some fairly crude calculations, and really these traveler preference surveys that we're going to be doing are going to give us a much better sense of how accurately we were estimating that previously, and really help determine what those trips are going to end up costing. In terms of the permanent toll, so I would say that right now the thought is that the toll would remain on the roadway. It does not come off at a certain point. And the reason for that is because one of the primary objectives with managed lanes is to have that tool in place. And in that case, the tolling is the tool that allows you to manage the operation of the express lane. If you take the tolls off, then it reverts back into being a general purpose lane, and you lose your ability to maintain that reliable trip for the long haul. And so right now that's the thought, but we're at the beginning of this, and we really want to welcome feedback and discussion on that subject.
Cameron, I might just add, this is Adam Hamilton. So my question at the end was, because I totally agree in terms of the how you address the traffic by making it a toll road. But my question was, could it become an HOV lane at that point, or an electric and HOV lane, so that you're still accomplishing the purpose, but you've already paid for the project, and now it becomes, we eliminate the toll and make it something else?
So I think that that's certainly up for debate. The challenge with HOV lanes in this specific corridor really ties back to the way that tolling legislation is written that does not permit free trips. And so with a HOV lane, oftentimes those HOVs are permitted to drive without paying a toll if they're, say, 3 people or more in a car, or whatever the threshold is. If we wanted to explore that, or that was important to the community, we really want to hear that from you all and from the public as to whether that's something that's important to you all. It might require going back and amending that legislation to allow that sort of scenario to be permitted, though.
One last question that was in my list was, how much revenue do you think would be generated per year? So we have some idea as to how long it would take to pay off the city's portion.
So I'd have to go back and look at that in more detail to give you to look at it on a per year basis. The thing that I would say is when we did this analysis previously, we were looking at what was the total revenue that it might generate over a 30-year period. And if you think about traffic growing in the corridor, you would anticipate that in the early years, the congestion isn't so bad, and there would be much lighter use of the express lanes in the early years. But as traffic grows and grows and the congestion worsens, you would expect it to grow and generate more revenue on the back end. So to put a sort of a ballpark number in your mind, though, we had estimated roughly the generation of about $200 million over that 30-year period. Now, all that to be said, we're going to be taking a much deeper dive into that as this goes forward. So we really will have to truth whether those estimates are realistic.
All right, Cameron, a question Julie had was the changing costs. What does that look like? If I enter the lane at one cost, would it change prior to my exiting the lane?
This is one of my favorite questions with express lanes. So we've been talking about the pricing on the express lane being something that varies based on the congestion that's present on the highway at the time. And there's sort of two ways that is done. One is something that's called dynamic pricing, which is truly it is measuring the levels of congestion in the roadway in real time, and then through a fairly complicated algorithm, modifying the toll rate to try and keep the performance level at a certain speed. That's the most complicated way of doing it, but it is the most real-time way to adjust the pricing to based on the conditions in the field. And in that sort of scenario, the pricing does change, and some of them change every 6 minutes in some cases in some facilities. What you do have to watch, though, is generally speaking, Julie, when you enter, it is maintaining the price that was communicated when you enter. It does not change midstream, even in that dynamic pricing scenario. The other way,
Cameron, that's what I wanted to know is if the cost experience is at entering or at exiting, and so you have answered my question. The cost experience, or the cost event happens when I enter. It doesn't happen when I exit.
That's right. It's not realistic to show one price when you enter and then charge you another price after you've already committed to using the express lane.
And Cameron, would you clarify we talked about the city share, Overland Park share. Could you clarify what we mean by that? Because a couple people had that question, Fred and Julie. So
I'll do my best to do that. And I think that there's a lot of discussion around that city share, but I would say on any of these major expansion projects around the state, there is increasingly an expectation that there is some sort of local contribution to the project. And on a project like this, where there's the opportunity to generate revenue off of express lanes, I think that the logic is the revenue generated from the express lanes will be considered the local contribution to making the project happen. Pending a lot of discussion about the level of commitment and what level of revenue we really expect it to generate. But that is the thought, is that that is allowed to count as the local contribution, as opposed to, say, a city or a county or whatever coming with some kind of cash or in-kind contribution to help the project advance. Does that answer the question? But the expectation on what that level of city share is, to my understanding, has not been thought through at this point. It would be a better question for the secretary to answer.
All right, well, we had some additional question just about our communications, and I think that Tom and provided some good suggestions there. I think, why don't we move back to the questions on tolling from the Minty poll and see if we can address any of those. Kelsey, can you take us back there?
I will say, while we're bringing that up, very much appreciate the interaction with this group. This is fantastic. We really, this is exactly the type of questions and everything that we want from you all. So really appreciate that. Okay, so where do we want to start here?
I don't know, pick.
So go back up to the first. I started to read the first one. How much will it cost and how to enforce people paying the toll? And will enough people use it to actually alleviate traffic problems? So the question of will people actually use it? That's a fundamental question that we want to answer over this next several months as we take that deeper dive. And that depends on the level of congestion and the pricing. And so we will have to, that's why we want to dive into understanding what people are willing to pay. In terms of the enforcement, so there's a couple of different ways to enforce the use. So part of that is via technology and being able to capture errant behavior with the toll equipment, and such as cameras and things like that that are in the field. And then honestly, the other part of it is simply traditional enforcement with law enforcement that are watching to make sure that people are not using the lanes inappropriately. So it's really a combination of technology and policing.
And if we don't get to all these questions today, these will help us inform what our next meeting will look like in terms of making sure that we address these questions. I do want to jump over to the chat because Tracy had a good question. She wants to make sure she's clarified. Is it accurate to say, Cameron, that without tolling or similar cash share from the city, that this project would not advance?
I would ask someone from KDOT to answer that question if they're able to, but I think that at a minimum, it would likely not advance on the same time frame. There are other ways of advancing the project beyond just a contribution from toll revenue or a cash contribution, but it would be other strategies such as, say, reducing the scope of the project and only building portions of it, as opposed to alleviating the problems in the entire corridor might be one strategy, or simply delaying and pushing the time frame of moving a project to construction further out in time. Does that answer your question?
Cameron, I think that was my point, that in order to get the entire corridor done and to replace the 50-year-old current US 69 and get the additional capacity, that this project, as we're discussing it now, needs an infusion of cash one way or the other.
I think that's an accurate statement.
Clint, you have your hand raised. We'd love to hear your question.
We've spent a lot of time talking about the polling, or talking about how to fund it and tolls and how it works for a car and what our needs are. Cameron, are we doing anything new or different or innovative that we might be able to secure more, let's say, Department of Energy loan money to put EV charging built into the road? Anything about a third rail or in between for any higher speed to get people from port to port? Use some bigger city technologies. I mean, I know we're comfortable using these, but I guess I'd like to know, for this kind of price tag, that we're looking at something that has a semblance of future technologies, you know, that we can look at 20 years from now and say we just didn't rebuild our grandfather's infrastructure.
No, I think you bring up a good point, Clint, and I think we really welcome ideas like that. I was expecting you to ask if we were going to put a Hyperloop down the center line of US 69. But
I did actually. I haven't sent it to you, Cameron. and I can do it. And I can do it for less than 547 million for that. Just okay. So you know.
All right. Well, it's good. We ought to have that debate. But I do think, you know, Hyperloop aside, an advantage of having a lane that is managed in some way is it does give you a more natural test bed to, say, permit other innovative technologies such as autonomous vehicles, allowing them to use the lanes. I think one of the other questions that was brought up was about electric vehicles and allowing them to have special permitted uses in the lane. All of those become more easier possibilities to implement if you have that managed nature of the roadway, as opposed to, as you say, just rebuilding it as general purpose, our grandfather's infrastructure. So yeah, I think that all of those things should be on the table. Where do we want to go here next on questions?
Josh had a question, and I'm going to let him potentially ask about the survey question that he had that he put in the chat, if he'd like to. Because Chris, I think hopefully Chris Tatham is still on the phone. Otherwise, did we lose Chris?
Robin, if Chris is gone.
No, I'm still here, Robin.
Okay, so Chris would probably be able to address that. Josh, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just interested in any detail you can provide. It doesn't have to be on this meeting, but to the group or just to the county on jobs access, because from a public transportation standpoint, which is of course my wheelhouse, we're looking to try to solve a problem of importing labor into the county, and so we know that there's a lot of job density in Overland Park. But a lot of the people who are looking for that work are residing in Kansas City, Kansas and Kansas City, Missouri. So just interested to know what detail through the survey work that you did might be able to address that in relation to this corridor.
For this specific survey, probably not a lot, but we do a number of surveys for the KCATA and others. So there is other data sources that are out there that if you're interested offline, I'd be happy to talk to you about what's available.
That would be great. Appreciate it.
And I think I will, as we just have a couple more minutes, I will close with addressing this. What's the timeline to begin the community engagement? Well, this is our first meeting with you all, and so that sort of kicks off our community engagement. We are open to taking requests for presentations. Our website will be launched probably in the next couple of weeks, and we'll be sending out information to you all on that when we have that available and running, so that's where information will be about the project, and you can help if people ask you questions, you can drive traffic there, and we will be doing additional focus groups, as Chris mentioned, and there'll be a number of things happening in the months to come. So our next meeting with this group will probably be in January, and we will also be hosting a public meeting in January to talk about the purpose and need with the public and gather feedback from them on that, the purpose and need statement. So I think there's any last minute questions, otherwise we can wrap up, and we will be this meeting's been recorded. We will be providing that out to those folks that had not been were part of the group but weren't able to participate, and then meeting with anybody that wants to talk more specifically about the issues or about this meeting with them at a separate time. So just with 2 minutes left, any last minute comments from anyone, or any things that you have to have addressed before we close the meeting?
I just say great work on all that you've done, and thank you for inviting us to be a part of the conversation. It's excellent and very informative, and appreciate all you've done.
This is Greg. Could we get a roster that includes the staff folks that are supporting this, both within KDOT and the consultant? Our roster is only right now the members of the advisory group.
Yes, we will, and we will be updating that roster as there was a little bit of flux from when we sent it out. But so yes, we can do that. We'll provide a staff as well.
Thank you.
This is Fred. Could you also include emails in case we wanted to talk to another member of the committee directly?
Yes.
Thank you.
And if anyone's not comfortable with that, just let me know and we will not include that. But I would think everyone would be fine with it. But if you're not, just email me separately and we'll make note of that.
All right.
Well, a big thank you for your time. I know 2 hours is a long time for a video call, and we so much appreciate your interaction and your good questions. And we look forward to future great questions, and we'll be able to address some of these at our next meeting. And again, just thank you so much, and we look forward to working with you over the next several months.